Hello everyone and welcome to Seeker's Corner. Today we've got a video from Don Blackwell here on Facebook. I couldn't find another version of this video anywhere. Don Blackwell is an interesting character. For me, mainly because he is a Church of Christ preacher and I've actually sat in the pews while he preached. We're looking at, did dinosaurs coexist with humans, which is a big fat no. This is going to be an interesting one. He starts out with reading passages from the Bible, and it doesn't say what he thinks it says, and then we get into hoaxes and wishful thinking would be the best way to put it. At the end, we'll see how far we get. We have over 30 minutes of video from where we're starting here, and it's gonna be a ride. Well, let's hear how he starts this argument.
Thirdly, while the word dinosaur is not mentioned in the Bible, I would argue that there certainly are dinosaur-like creatures that are mentioned in the Bible. Now, I want us to look at a couple of them. I want you to get your Bible and turn to Job, the book of Job, and I want you to go to chapter 40 with me. Job, chapter 40, and go to verse 15. We're going to read this together, and then we're going to draw some facts out from this particular chapter.
Alright, as much fun as it would be to read it out myself, I'll let him give his commentary and probably add my own, just to break things up and keep them interesting.
Job chapter 40 and verse 15, the King James says, "Behold now, behemoth." I want you to focus on the word behemoth.
Because it's a name, and names translate so well from one language to another. I mean, of course, what does John translate into Japanese, for instance?
Because we're going to break that down and discuss the word here in just a minute, this Hebrew word. The Lord says to Job, "Behold now behemoth, which I made with thee." That is significant. He says, behold it, look at it, I have made it with thee. He says...
So, we have to assume this is a creature that Job could have actually known about. He's going to claim Job could look at it, but it could also just be he's heard about it from other people.
He eateth grass as an ox. Lo now, his strength is in his loins, and his force is in the navel of his belly. He moveth his tail like a cedar tree. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together. Think about the sinews of his stones. He has almost an armor-like structure on his body. His bones...
An armor-like structure? How did he get to that? And besides, you could argue that stones is a very common euphemism for testicles. And then what does this verse say? I'm sorry, I couldn't help it.
Bones are as strong pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. He is the chiefest of the ways of God. He that made him can make his sword to approach unto him. Surely the mountains bring him forth food, where all the beasts of the field play. He lieth under the shady trees, in the covert of the reed and fens. The shady trees cover him with their shadow, the willows of the brook.
So, we're going to have to talk about this one, even though he skips it when he gets trying to talk about dinosaurs, for obvious reasons. Just wait until you see which dinosaur he's suggesting, and then try to imagine it taking shade underneath a willow tree. Yeah.
Compass him about. Behold, he drinketh up a river, and hasteth not. He trusteth that he can draw up Jordan, the Jordan River, into his mouth. This is a large creature being described here. He taketh it with his eyes, his nose pierceth through snares. Now let's break this down and look at some...
Notice he looks up from nose, pierces through stairs. And notice, it's like, oh, I'm just going to ignore one of the most important pieces of evidence about who this could actually be.
This word behemoth is a Hebrew word. This Hebrew word appears only one time in all of the Bible, and it's in this verse. There has been a lot of controversy as to how to translate this Hebrew word. Literally, this Hebrew word means kingly or giant beast.
So I think this is all I really want to talk about the word behemoth. I mean, it's technically a name, and names are kind of like a pain to translate. It only appears once, it's a name of a creature, so who cares, right? But I just want to point out that the name would fit elephants, one of the candidates from... Well, we don't assume dinosaurs are contemporary with people crowds, groups of things, and one of the ones he'll be arguing against. So think about an Indian war elephant. Would it not fit kingly beasts? It's all decked out for war, it's been trained to deal with people, and it's running towards your armed forces like arg. Yeah, I can see like Bronze Age guys going, yeah, this is King of Beasts, Lords of Animals, or whatever. It would fit very, very well, just as a name. I'm going to skip to the next argument, alright? So here we're going to start his, it's totally not an elephant or an hippopotamus.
Now, some people have translated this. They look at this behemoth and they say, well, that is an elephant. What's being described here is an elephant. Some people say, no, this is a hippopotamus that's being described here. Let's break this down and look at this and see if this sounds to you like this is an elephant. I want you to look at this. First it says, he moveth his tail like a cedar tree. Oops, I should have put that one up earlier here. Let's go to the next one here. This is the rear end of an elephant. It says that this creature being described moveth his tail like a cedar. That is like a cedar tree. Now, I want you to look at the tail of this elephant. Does that look like a cedar tree to you?
I just want to pause here and point out, the verse he read says, moveth like a cedar tree. Is that tail moving? So how would we know whether or not it moved like a cedar tree? Of course, a cedar tree sways in the wind, so I assume it's just talking about it swinging back and forth, right? Well, let's take a look. See this tail swinging back and forth? Just whoop, whoop, whoop. Kind of looks like a sway in the wind, right? Randomly goes bigger. Kind of just doing its thing. I think this is what it was talking about, if we want to assume it's moving its tail. However, I don't know that's actually what it's talking about. He's also going to talk about a hippopotamus, but we can just assume it's the same thing. I mean, we can just assume it's talking about how the tail swings back and forth, unless we take a look at the actual word. Whoopsies. I'm going to have to do some editing. Yay. Well, let's hear the rest of his argument and see what happens.
It doesn't look like a cedar tree to me. It looks more like a stick. It looks more like a twig.
What is he saying? Look again.
Now, some people say, well, no, this is a hippopotamus. What's being described here is a hippopotamus. Well, let's go on and look at the hippopotamus here. I bet you never thought you'd see the rear end of a hippopotamus at a lectureship. But look at this. Does that look like a cedar tree? Whatever the creature being described here is, he says he moves his tail like a cedar tree. That looks like a twig to me. Because he says he moves his tail like a cedar tree. That looks like a twig to me.
He moves his tail like a cedar tree. Just want to play that loop just a few times. Just to drive in the absurdity of that statement.
Doesn't look like a cedar tree. It does not fit the description of this creature. Now let's go to this next one.
Can you imagine this thing? Is this old bad representation of a sauropod of some kind trying to take shade underneath a willow tree, or really any tree? I mean, these things are massive. But we'll get to that as we get deeper into this.
How about this one? He has a tail like a cedar tree. Does that look like a cedar tree? See some heads now. It looks like a cedar tree to me. I think this fits. It has whatever this is massive. He says he drinks up the Jordan.
So he's moving on, and we'll get to the drinks up the Jordan in a second. Actually, we'll have to probably bounce back and do it again. But notice he hasn't talked about what any of the words actually mean, despite doing so for the name. I think I know why. So this is the Blue Letter Bible page. It has a whole bunch of concordances and stuff, and we'll notice that this word is the word translated moveth. If we check right here, it's gonna tell us that, yes, it's Job 17. He moveth his tail like a cedar. But we're going to look at this. So the outline of biblical usage is not my favorite of the things, but it says, one is to delight in, take pleasure in, desire, or be pleased with. And of men to take pleasure in, desire, to be delighted to please, of God to delight in, have pleasure in, to be pleased to do. And two is to move to or bend down. But you notice it's only translated once in one location to move. That's in Job. I wonder why. Primitive root, properly inclined to, by implication, literally but rarely to bend, figuratively to be pleased with, desire. Any at all, have take, delight, favor, like, move, be well with, be pleased. Yeah, so it's basically mostly translated as to have pleasure in, or to have favor with, or to delight in, or to be pleased with, and then every so often, fairly rarely move. And by fairly rarely, I mean one. And if we remember this entire verse, sinews of his stones, so this could also be translated, he takes pleasure in his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together. This literally could be just a penis joke. I mean, seriously, I wouldn't be surprised if a person wrote a penis joke into their holy scripture, but here we have it. I know why Don Blackwell did not talk about this in his little presentation. What I don't know is why he pretends that their unique one-time translation of move is actually saying looks like, or instead of moves like. Not only is he misrepresenting his translation, but he is ignoring the fact that this is probably not about a tail at all. And in doing so, he's basically forcing his conclusion on the words of his Bible instead of just taking the words and trying to figure out what it's actually saying. This is my problem with this section of the entire thing. Alright, his next point is a bit of a drive-by, but it's sort of important, so we're going to look at it anyways.
See some heads now. It looks like a cedar tree to me. I think this fits. It has whatever this is massive. He says he drinks up the Jordan. He takes in the river. He has a tail like a...
Okay, he's back to the tail again. He's saying this is massive because he drinks up the Jordan, whatever that actually means. Well, let's see what he actually meant. And we come over here and here it is. Behold, he drinketh up a river and hasteth not. He trusteth that he can draw the Jordan into his mouth. But King James is a bit of a pain to read, so let's see what other translations say. Though a flood presses, he does not run away. He feels safe, even if the Jordan swells up to his mouth. So the modern King James doesn't say drink at all. In fact, it's talking about behemoth is perfectly fine, even if the water is above his mouth. The ESV gives you fairly similar stuff. He is not frightened, even if the Jordan rushes up against his mouth. The American Standard is also the same. Why would they translate it so different? Well, if we pop over here, we can see what the Strong's Concordance number for all these words are. If we look, drink up, let's see what this says. If we look over at this guy here, we will see we're looking at 621. In the King James, it's translated once as drink up, but we'll see that it's all, the translations down here are all different. Press upon, oppress, violent, defraud, to do violence, oppress, wrong, extort, press upon, defraud, overflow, greatly deceive, defraud, and then occasionally drink up. But if you're basically doing everything as aggressive, oppressive wordings, and literally oppressor and oppression at some times, drink up seems a bit weird. And this is why all the other translations translate this section as a flood or, wait, that's King James, a flood or turbulence, and the Jordan rushing or overflowing and all that. Because in reality, this is the most likely translation. Drink up just doesn't make sense in context of a river and a... Now, here's the interesting part about this. This part I feel safe even as Jordan swells up to his mouth. If we think about a elephant, this makes so much more sense than just about any other creature. Alright, so if we pop over here, what we have is an underwater image of, well, an elephant swimming. And notice how he breathes. He sticks his trunk up above the water. Can't really see it very well here. Let's move forward. So if we look here, watch how he breathes. The elephant just reaches his trunk up and is like, okay, look, his mouth is open. He's just like, nah, 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 do not care. The point I'm making here is that this verse right here makes so much more sense for an elephant than any other creature that's ever been around. Even if we assume a sauropod, one has to ask, just how heavy does the flooding have to be for the Jordan to get up to the sauropod's mouth? Why would it not run away, or why would it not be frightened if the water was up to its mouth? Like most other creatures, This dinosaur has its nose and mouth very close together, and thus only an elephant could fulfill this and all the other requirements of this location so well. I guess in theory one could argue it was a mammoth, but those giant fur coats wouldn't fit in the middle of the Middle East. If no other verse convinces you this is actually talking about an elephant, it should be this one. I don't remember what the next argument is, so I'll probably have to skip forwards a little bit.
Verse 19 says he's the chiefest of God's ways. That means he's the biggest, the strongest, the grandest. Is the elephant the biggest, strongest, grandest of all of God's creatures and creations, or is the hippopotamus? I want you to look at this next slide.
Alright, so notice he goes, is the elephant the biggest and strongest, or is the hippopotamus? And then he goes to a picture of a hippopotamus, as if ignoring the possibility that the elephant definitely is one of the biggest and strongest creatures that were probable for people living in the Jordan area to have seen, or at least heard about. I want you to imagine for a moment those Indian war elephant ideas again. I don't know when this book was written, and I don't know when war elephants began to be trained. But it doesn't really matter, does it? If tales of giant elephants came their way to people who've never seen anything bigger than a lion or a tiger, it would sound like the grandest of God's creation. After all, we've already seen how well this description fits an elephant, so we already know it's likely to be an elephant. His ignoring an elephant as a possible grandest of God's creation is unfortunate. Let's assume, for a moment, this is an actual conversation. And let's assume that dinosaurs died before man came out on the scene. Why would God talk about a creature that Job has no knowledge of? He would still talk about the elephant as the biggest and the best creature that Job has ever heard of. And that's fine, because that's how these sorts of things go. So even if you want to hold Job to be inspired, there's nothing wrong with this being an elephant. I'm going to skip his talking about a hippopotamus because I think we've made it clear I don't think it's a hippopotamus, so this argument doesn't make sense to me.
Verse number 20 says the mountains bring him food. That couldn't be the hippopotamus. The hippopotamus almost never leaves the river.
But it could be an elephant, because remember, between the Jordan River Valley and India are giant mountains. So it would be very believable for Job, or whoever wrote the book, or the people the book was written for, to believe that the elephants came from the mountain. After all, I personally believe this was written by people, and people make mistakes. So this is what I think is going on here. Don wants to believe dinosaurs and men live together. Therefore, Don reads dinosaurs into things that shouldn't have them.
I think that this is a dinosaur, or a dinosaur-like creature, and I think that's the reason, particularly when the King James Version was translated in 1611, they had a hard time translating this word.
I think this is a dinosaur. No, kidding, you do. I'm not surprised you do. But it's not. It doesn't fit any dinosaur. And it does fit an elephant. Difficulty translating a word is difficulty translating a word. It doesn't mean anything. And the fact that this word is actually a name means it's not that surprising people had difficulty.
Because they weren't familiar at that time with the concept of dinosaurs. When people try to make it fit today, there's no animal today that exists that fits this.
I believe I've shown that an elephant does, in fact, exist this. I believe I have shown that it does, in fact, fit this. Therefore, in the fact that Don did not take any of the arguments for a elephant seriously, did not talk about how an elephant could breathe underwater, or other verses that we're probably going to have to go back and look at ourselves, do not fit a sauropod, but do fit an elephant.
But when we go back and match it up with a dinosaur, it matches. I want you to turn over one chapter.
Alright, so he's moving on to the next chapter, just like I thought. So let's go back and look at some more verses. Modern, shall any take him before his eyes, or pierce through his nose with cords? So, this one's harder to figure out, because it does sound like it's talking about fishing. You could here talk about the massive weights of both the hippopotamus and the elephant, and how catching them as a fisherman would be poor for your nets. But the big one I want to look at is he lies under the lotus, hiding place in the reeds and marsh. The lotus trees cover him with their shadow. The willows of the brook surround him. Now, both hippopotamus and elephants could sit under shade trees just fine. But what about a sauropod? Members of dinosaurs, they are huge, huge, huge creatures. Like, if we look at this infograph, we have a length of 82 feet or 25 meters. This is basically 25 yards long. A quarter of a football field. Do you think something this big could curl up underneath a willow tree and, not get described as curling up underneath a willow tree? At a height of 39 feet tall. It's 4 stories tall. Do you think such a creature could actually get up underneath a short little willow tree without it just being utterly ridiculous? The smaller sauropods reached a length of up to 15 meters and 50 feet long. So even the small ones were so long that they would literally have to curl up underneath shade trees. And yet that's not how it's described. Almost like it wasn't talking about something so big it could literally wrap around entire trees in order to get into the shade, assuming it could even fit underneath the trees. Next, we're going to look at Job 41 and the Leviathan. This is where we're going to start getting into some more sciencey claims. But I just want to say at the outset, the Leviathan can breathe fire. It's not a real creature. It's a mythical creature. If it's based on anything, it's been so heavily exaggerated to make that basis exceedingly difficult to justify. There is no way you can convince me, and we'll see why in a minute, there is no way you can convince me that a real creature who lived in the sea would breathe fire.
I want you to turn over one chapter, Job chapter 41, and read about this creature that is called the Leviathan. Let's read this. Canst thou draw out Leviathan with a hook? Remember, this is the Lord speaking to Job, and he says, Job, can you pull the Leviathan out with a hook? That is, I'm describing a massive creature. Job, I dare you to pull him out with a hook like you would a fish.
I mean, this would apply to a real or mythical creature. Can you fish this thing out? Doesn't really matter if it's a whale or a giant sea dragon monster thing, or even just one of those massive sea crocodiles, because I wouldn't pull that thing out with a hook if you paid me.
Will he make many supplications unto thee? Will he speak soft words unto thee? That is he going to cower down and just give in when you hook him, Job? You know that's not going to happen. Will he make a covenant with thee?
No, that's not what it says. It says, will he make supplications? Will he talk to you? Clear that this is not an animal, but an intelligent being of some kind. Much like how dragons are often intelligent in stories.
He's saying, Job, is this an animal you can capture? Can you drop a line down and grab him and take him back to town and show him off, and he's going to be a pet to you, and you're going to hook him, and then he is going to be a slave to you? And of course, the implied answer is, you know, you cannot do that.
Obviously, I skipped parts of this Bible reading, but there's a lot of repetition here, and we have things to cover. So let's cover that. The thing about the Leviathan is, it sounds like a mythical creature. Look how it's described. Can you fish him out? Will he talk to you? Will he make supplications? Will he make a pact with you? Will he make a covenant? Will you play with him like a bird? Will bands of fishermen come after him? Can you fill his skin with barbed iron or his head with fish spears? Can you spear him while you're doing it? Most of this is just look at how amazingly hard it is to fight him. Not what he looks like, not what he acts like, not what he eats. Just how hard is it to fight him? Almost like they're not talking about something Job is uber familiar with. As we'll get to in a few seconds, will you remember him in the battle? Behold, the hope of his in vain. When he comes out of the water, you're just like in awe. Who can stand before him? None is so fierce. Who then is he that can stand before me? Why would God talk about who could stand before him? Well, if we pop over to my notes, if we pop over to Psalms real quick. 74:12. Here it is. Salvation amid here, yet God is my King of all, working in salvation. He does divide the sea by his strength. He breaks the heads of the sea monsters, and he breaketh the heads of Leviathan into pieces. So it's actually talking about a time when, at least it sounds like he's talking about a time when God fought the Leviathan. And I mean, we can just keep going. When you compare this, it also talks about the behemoth as if he's an animal, and yet we have. Will he make supplications? Will he make a covenant? Now this is an intelligent creature. It's clear to me that the Leviathan is being spoken about as a mythological creature, as we would speak about a dragon having conversations and working out contracts and, agreeing to work with people. Yet here we have Don Blackwell is about to come up and say, this is a real creature. He's even going to make an argument about how there might have been a creature that could actually, and flames go from his mouth, despite the fact there is no animal that can actually breathe fire. It's such a disingenuous argument to claim this is a real thing. I mean, at best, it's a mythological creature based on a real creature, but it's just too much. Well, and this video is getting too long, so I'll call it quits here. We didn't actually get to any of the sciencey claims, so that will be the next video. Hopefully done next week. If not, I'll try to get it in the week after. And so we'll have to just remember what was said before. Shouldn't be too hard. Thank you for all watching. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, leave a comment or something like that. If you didn't like it, also leave me a comment. That way I can learn some things. Next time we'll talk about electric eels, not fire-breathing dinosaurs, and how none of the apparent footprints are actually footprints, and a whole host of hoaxes about different types of art. Thank you, and have a nice day.